Do we start? Okay, let me start by saying that my wife keeps complaining about two things about me, specifically. One is that I watch too much of news. I'm always watching news on TV and nothing else. And the other is that I travel too much. So I had a tough time telling her that I'm traveling to Delhi today to talk about news. News is a genre. Uh, it's delighted to be here with all of you and talking about the whole thing about innovation in media sales when it comes to news as a genre or news TV. Uh, Firstly, I'm a big fan of news, and I must tell you that there are several things about the way news television in India has evolved that I think not just me, but a lot of people in our industry admire. I think first and foremost, I think news as a genre on TV is as lively, it's as colorful, it's as restless, it's as inquisitive, it's as vibrant, and it's as full of color as India itself. There are occasionally debates one keeps hearing and having in the office. The few schools of thought would say that, maybe we go a little over the top, maybe we have too many of these long-winded debates. But I think somewhere, that's what India is all about, and that's what I think the news genre captures so well. So I think as advertisers, as marketers, as media agencies, I think one thing that we really appreciate is news truly represents the nation. But obviously, there are a lot of things that could be better. And if you have to just sum it up in one word, I think we probably need a lot more balance in terms of the way we run the news business in several aspects. Firstly, I think we need to balance a lot more of the good with the bad. We also need to balance our reportage between what's happening in the big cities and what's happening in the smaller towns. We also need to balance in terms of the kind of target audience we appeal to. We had a question in the last discussion saying, are we too male-centric? It's not just the male-female debate, but it's also about the youth, engaging with the youth, with the kind of demographic profile that we have in India. News as a genre can probably do much more to engage with the youth. Also, I think, adapt and embrace new platforms, especially digital media platforms. Some of the news broadcasters have done it extremely well, while some of the others are yet to make a start. And I think that's extremely critical for news as a genre to survive, going forward. So while I think there are a lot of good things we see about the news genre, I think there is definitely a need for, like I said, balance. Just to put things in perspective, before I get into a few points from a media buying or from a client perspective, just to put a few numbers so that we get a context. As per the Group M estimates, the news genre share of the total ADEX is hovering at about 13%, 1-3. It's about 13%, and it's been around this number for a few years now. The total amount of advertising on television in this country is a little over 16,000 crores. It's about 16,800 crores, and of that, 13% is news. If one way of looking at it is, it's actually not bad at all, because if you look at the total contribution of news to viewership, it's less than 10%. So to that extent, it's slightly over-indexed in terms of getting its ad revenue. And if you actually split the numbers, the answer actually lies in the way the English news space, despite what many believe, is terribly obviously over-indexed in terms of what it drives through revenues versus the kind of viewership that it delivers. So overall, that's a broad kind of a number, 13% of the total ADEX, despite having less than 10% of the total viewership. In terms of ad spend growth, we are seeing TV as a medium across all genres growing at about 14% year on year. And news as a genre is growing by about 11%. So slightly under-indexed in terms of growth versus the rest of the TV industry. Again, if you split the numbers up, you see an interesting pattern. Hindi news as a genre is actually growing at 15%. So it's actually over-indexed, not just the news genre, but it's over-indexed the TV as a medium itself. So Hindi is growing well. English is growing at about 7% as per our estimates, and regional news channels are growing by about 10%. So I mean, one way of looking at it is the numbers don't obviously never reveal the complete story or the picture, but one school of thought is that, things are not so bad. Things are actually pretty okay. But I think what one needs to worry about or think about, especially if one is in the news broadcast business anywhere in the world, whether India or anywhere, is about the future, is about what's going to happen in the coming years, what's going to happen in the next 3 years, 5 years. And that's simply because, I mean, all of us in the media industry are obviously, grappling with this whole digital disruption and saying how is digital disrupting all our lives, all our businesses, all our organizations. So that's the one point I'd like to dwell on for the next few minutes and say that, how is the whole digital explosion impacting the news genre or the news TV genre. Firstly, again, let's look at some numbers. We have over 220 million Indians today on digital media, and which is very, very vast number compared to the weekly number of people who actually watch, let's say, news on TV channels. It's way higher. In fact, it's in a multiple of almost I would say 6 to 7. And we are also seeing through the data that a lot of time on the internet, on digital media, on mobile phones is actually spent consuming news. And guess what? A lot of this news consumption doesn't happen through news sites necessarily. It happens through social media sites. It happens through your feeds in Facebook. It happens through your feeds in Twitter, etc. So the whole consumption of news is changing, and is changing pretty rapidly. From sitting in front of the television and taking in 1 or 2 hours of content to actually on the go, on the fly, every minute, every other hour, getting into your smartphone, getting into your iPad, and catching up on news through short bites. So obviously that's got huge implications going forward. Just to narrate 1 or 2 other, incidents, more anecdotal. I was recently spending time with some of the new joinees at Group M. About 25 people who've joined our organization recently. These are, people who either, freshly graduated from college or got work experience about 3 to 4 years. So, I would say in their mid-20s, mid to late 20s. It was very interesting to note that of the entire group that I was addressing of about 25 people, when I asked them how many of you actually read the newspaper today, not a single hand went up. And when I asked how many of them had watched television or news the previous night or that morning, very, very few hands went up. And then we had a very interesting discussion on how content is consumed by, and we're talking about people who are very soon getting into a purchasing class for lots of goods and services. And, overwhelmingly the answer was a lot of consumption is happening, through digital media. So the other statistic I'd like to share is, this is again data for India, and this has come out of the Ericsson lab, which does studies on how much time people are spending on various devices to consume content. And people who own smartphones in India are already spending close to 200 minutes a day on their smartphone, of course, across various activities, from checking emails to surfing the net, reading content, reading news, etc. So close to 200 minutes, while the time spent by the same people on television is dropping to less than 120 minutes. So you can see where that shift is happening. And, so that, I think is the single biggest not problem, but it's also an opportunity, depends on how you see it, that news or any genre for that matter needs to keep in mind. Okay, so with all this change happening, with the digital disruption and everything else, what is it finally doing to consumers and what is it doing to brands? Because, I thought it's my duty to tell you that, given that I'm on that side of the business. And from there, we will try and draw implications, therefore, for let's say, news owners, news broadcasters, in terms of how to increase their monetization. But let's spend a minute and look at, what is it really doing to the whole process of marketing and the whole process of advertising, etc. I'd like to talk about 3 things fundamentally. One is the whole process of, let's say, research, of gathering insights, gathering consumer insights, gathering brand insights. That's going through a massive change. In fact, a lot of the old models of measurement, of research are today being questioned. And, clients and agencies are coming up with newer models. I'd like to talk about a couple of things we've been doing at Group M, specifically in the measurement and research space of media consumption. and applying it to brands. So Nestle is a client for whom we do a lot of work in the digital space. And last year when we got the mandate from Nestle, one of the things we did working with the client was we actually set up a social command center in the client's office, which is the size of a conference hall, which is fully wired up with screens, which, and on these screens, we actually monitor in real time, all the chatter that goes on the brands of Nestle, the categories that Nestle operates in, and of course, all its competitors. And we therefore start getting, insights. We start getting, we start monitoring all the stuff that's happening in the virtual space, which, like I said, is a pretty large space. And basis that, a lot of decisions are taken. Of course, marrying that with other forms of research and everything else. And a lot of decisions are taken, whether it's in terms of what kind of messaging strategies you need to have, what kind of towns probably have a greater propensity for certain products and so on. And you get all this information much quicker than in the past. A few other examples, we actually used techniques like this to, advise one of our clients who happens to be a broadcaster and who owns a network of channels. Monitoring the kind of chatter that is going on about commentators. We were able to, in real time, give a lot of feedback on, who are the commentators, who are more popular, etc. And, the broadcaster could, accordingly, figure out the schedule of commentators for the rest of the match. And so also, if you're promoting a serial, and if you're typically promoting, you take one or two characters of that serial and you use those characters to promote the serial. Today, you're able to use digital media insights in real time to figure out, which kind of promos are working well. So who's the character who's probably more popular than the others? And in real time, you're able to, make those changes and add on that. So this whole area of research, this whole area of understanding consumers is going through a sea change. And I think the overemphasis on, models of the past, on measurements of the past, just measuring the number of people who viewed it, is I don't think enough. In fact, we've moved far beyond that. We look very actively at social media to gather rich insights. We actually are able to monitor the buzz today across various programs and channels. So I think that's one area to look at. The other is, also in terms of content, in terms of, messaging. How do you actually, as brands in the digital age today, communicate effectively with your consumers? And, obviously, advertising has its limitations in the digital age because all of us get very irritated when we see ads when we are on any digital site. So branded content and intelligently leveraging content and getting brands to ride on it is also gaining a lot of popularity. And here again, to just narrate a recent example of the way we launched Honda Mobilio, the new car of Honda. So rather than go for a conventional campaign, we actually created a piece of digital content using Kapil Sharma, who was the famous comedy with Kapil star, and got him to actually enact a whole series of. It was a very interesting story built across 3-4 different pieces of content. And we launched it only on digital media, not on television. And we got about 1.5 million hits within the first day and a half. And the clients' order books were getting filled for test drives pretty much with the digital campaign alone. They didn't really need to spend too much of money getting into a on a full-blown offline campaign. So these are some of the ways in which agencies, brands are adapting to the digital age, and then obviously we'll now look at what kind of implications these have specifically for news channels. So I think there are before I get into ideas or opportunities for news channels, let me just take a step back and say what does all this therefore mean for advertisers? What does it mean for brands? Because of the 24/7 scrutiny that all brands come under today because of digital media, brands have no choice but to act a lot more responsibly. Not only do brands have to act more responsibly, marketing itself as a function has to be a lot more meaningful today than it ever was. Which is why I guess we are seeing a lot of brands, a lot of companies, come up with campaigns where they're actually trying to go beyond just selling the product or the brand, and they're trying to associate their brand with a larger purpose or a larger cause. So, you're hearing a lot of jargon like cause marketing, positioning with a purpose, making marketing more meaningful, etc. So that in a nutshell is what advertisers and brand managers are today striving to do. So if you ask me, I've been in this media agency business for close to 20 years. The single biggest change from a brand manager perspective is, in the past, I think a brand manager spent a lot of his time just managing the sales of his brand, managing the marketing of his brand. Today, I think they spend an equal amount of time trying to look at a larger purpose for the brand. What's the vision of the brand? What kind of, how do I make my brand more meaningful? How do I connect better with my audience? So if being responsible, being credible, and being a more meaningful kind of an entity is what a brand is striving for, just keep that on one side and look at what the news genre stands for, or is supposed to stand for. Across all the genres, news is a genre which is obviously shows a lot of responsibility, needs to have a lot of credibility. And last but not the least is also, unlike a lot of the other genres, or most of the other genres, it's something which happens in real time. As and when events happen in real time, news broadcasted in real time. So as brands are moving towards real-time marketing, and brands are moving towards more meaningful marketing, according to us, this is probably the best time to be in the news business, the news broadcast business, because there's a very natural fit between wanting to be real time, wanting to be more meaningful, and wanting to be more credible. So here are the 4-5 ideas or thoughts broadly. So one is, I think, news broadcasters co-creating socially responsible agendas with brands, socially responsible agendas with organizations. We have started seeing it in a small way, but I think this is a big opportunity area for news channels, because there is nothing more credible than a credible news channel. Of course, there's nothing more dangerous than a news channel that's not credible. So there are two extreme reactions you can get. But there's a wonderful opportunity to co-create meaningful agendas and get brands and news channels to kind of partner. So I think that's one idea I'd like to share. The other is, we spoke a lot about digital, and we spoke a lot about the disruption in digital. One of the things we haven't seen too much is the news broadcasters actually investing in digital assets, leveraging digital assets. It's happening in bits and pieces. It's happening maybe with some of the larger players in the English space, but not really happening across the spectrum, across regional channels, Hindi news channels. So I think there's a lot of headroom for improvement and growth, because as media agencies, as people who invest our clients' monies, today we seriously look at the way digital platforms can reach our consumers, and because it's a very, very effective way to reach consumers. So digital is a big gap, I would say, in the current offering, and that's something which will help boost sales. The third idea I'd like to share was, again, the point I made about metrics and research, etc. I think it's high time we moved away from conventional metrics, from conventional research, and again looked at newer models. Look at buzz, which you can actually measure today through social media. Try and measure consumer sentiment. Try and measure social impact and all of that. So if you move away from this, I think what you can really try and arrive at is understand each of your viewers a lot better. I mean, I think the ideal thing for each news broadcaster would be to be able to go to an agency or a client and not just sell his viewership in terms of numbers, but to actually talk to his clients in terms of what kind of viewers is he getting, what is the profile of those viewers, what are their tastes, what do they like, what do they dislike, where do they go to, what kind of restaurants do they eat in, what kind of airlines do they like to fly. Today, it's possible to do all of this. It's possible to do all of this if we change our mindsets and move away from traditional research models, get into social media, get into digital media, invest in technology, invest in, there's a company called Crayon Data, which is doing very, very interesting work in the big data space. They are actually today able to come up with what they call taste graphs for different consumers. And a taste graph would mean, they will show you different clusters of consumers and all their habits across offline, online, purchase habits, the destinations they go to, etc. And this is one area which, again, as not just news broadcasters, but I think across the board, media owners need to take note of and invest a lot more in terms of technology, in terms of data. Because, when you go and pitch your channel or your medium with a powerful data story, there's no client or agency in the world, who will not accept it. Again, we don't see too much of that happening. Either the sales happen more in terms of the conventional FCT kind of sale, or basis relationship, or basis existing or outdated metrics. I think we need to really start thinking aggressively about more relevant metrics and newer ways of capturing them. And yeah, so last but not the least, I think going beyond, like I said, reach, frequency, and all the other jargon that we've got used to over the last many years, and actually creating solutions that combine digital with offline. I think that's really the need of the hour, especially the core target audiences that watch news or consume news across multiple platforms. A large percentage of them today actually do it across 2 or more platforms. There is data to actually show that. So there are very few people who consume news only on television. So, if you have to offer a more holistic solution to your clients, you'll have to kind of think out of the box, literally. So that's where I wanted to kind of wrap up before we get into the panel discussion. So just to kind of summarize what I said over the last 10, 15 minutes, I think very clearly the big disruption that digital is creating is a huge opportunity for news. The reason being, brands are forced to become a lot more meaningful. Marketers are forced to also become a lot more meaningful in the way they go and promote their brands. And there's no better genre than the news genre to actually, engage with consumers, given this background and given this context. However, I don't think, news channels would be able to lap up this opportunity fully if they don't invest in technology, if they don't invest in data, if they don't really invest in understanding their consumers, and if they don't invest in digital assets. So I think, once all of this is done, I'm sure the sky is the limit, as they say in India. Thank you.
That was wonderful insights. Just one question before I hand you over to Paritosh to take on the panel discussion with Anamika and the rest of the panel members.